Welcome to the Victorious Living Podcast. You're about to hear real stories of real people who have discovered the real hope of Jesus Christ. I'm Christy Overton Johnson, the founder and publisher of Victorious Living magazine. Since 2011, I've had the privilege of sharing the most amazing life stories. I never cease to be amazed at the life-transforming power of Jesus Christ. Today in our podcast, you're going to go deeper into these amazing God stories and hear from those who have overcome incredible odds and discover how they found a life of freedom. You can discover it too. I trust that you'll enjoy today's conversation between our host and our special guest. Thank you for listening, and be sure to share the hope you hear and the mission of Victorious Living.
Hi, this is Randy Claypool with Victorious Living, and next to me, across the room, in the room, is BJ Emerson. How you doing, BJ?
Great to be with you.
I know at the time of year that this is being recorded, it's a little nippy outside. So while I'm much further south of you, in honor of how cold it might be outside your doors, I wore a nice big heavy shirt to let you know I sympathize.
All right, appreciate that.
How chilly it might be there.
Yeah.
You have an interesting story that, well, let me kind of lead into it this way. I think of my upbringing. I was fortunate to have good parents, loving parents, a Christian home, a Christian influence. And when I get out there in the world, especially going into the prisons and start hearing stories, I realize how different, how fortunate I was. So I got to let you tell your story because it's interesting and deep, and but in a way of comparison to the incarcerated, how might your story be just a little different or from a different angle?
Yeah, I have certainly a different perspective. And I usually like to start out with, I haven't been where you are, but I have been where your children are. And I was the child of an incarcerated parent. My father, when I was 14 years old, was arrested by the FBI after a long string of crimes. At this point, like today, we would consider him a serial bomber. Like probably Homeland Security would be involved. He would be someone that was, he, across 3 states, he had 26 counts of extortion. He would make fake bombs and put them in offices and buildings. He would call them and say, I'm going to blow up your building if you don't bring me money. And in the way that he did it, he was very, successful, for lack of better words. Did it 26 times before being caught. In 1983 is when the crimes occurred, and then 1984 he was caught. And so that was kind of what I was looking at when I was 14, 15 years old. Here's my father going to prison, and at one point was facing up to 76 years for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
What was your dad's motive for doing those kinds of things?
Great question. His addiction to drugs, alcohol, and gambling were what drove him to do these things, to get the funds to support his habits. And that's what drove him to do those things. He was, desperate and did some bold things. But you're going to see in this story that God kind of, used that later in a very different way. So that's what drove him to do that. So that's kind of my perspective. And kind of long term, some things happened there when my father went into prison that just changed the trajectory of my family. His father before him had abandoned him when he was very young. And so my father grew up without a father as well, really. And so there was brokenness there. With my grandfather. We didn't know if he was alive or dead. He had abandoned the family, and we didn't know what was going on with him. So that side of my family tree was, not something I found a lot of inspiration from. In fact, I say that I wanted to cut down my family tree. And at that point, because it was so dark, so hopeless, we just had a lot of, well, there wasn't anything good to be seen in my family tree.
Was your dad doing this stuff in secret? I mean, were you aware at all of what he was up to or what was going on, or at what point? I mean, it was just a total shock and surprise.
Yeah, he was actually living, my mother and my father had divorced before I remember when I was a baby. He was living about 45 minutes from us at the time
Mm.
and had no idea that this stuff was going on. I was clueless as a teenager, I think. But yeah, I had no idea. And then yeah, he was arrested, and even I didn't even really know the details for many years. But nowadays you go on newspapers.com and you can find it all. It's amazing what's
Wow.
on there.
Yeah, I mean, I
All
read
the
some of the
headlines.
headlines that
Yeah,
you
you can
bring
look them
out.
all up. And when my son was 14 years old, I handed him these articles and I said, here's what I was dealing with when I was your age. And my son, he was just like, what? Grandpa did all this stuff. That's crazy.
When yeah, so but you and your dad, how long was your dad actually in prison then? Because you said he
Uh,
did federal time and then
yep. Started out with his federal time and then the state. Uh, there's a lot of different counties in Pennsylvania that wanted, you know, to see him incarcerated for a long time. But he ended up in just under 5 years. He was gone. But I packed a lot of things, as when you're growing up and you're 14, 15 years old and your dad's gone for 5 years, at that point, there's a lot of things that you miss. And so, you think about graduating high school or getting a car, getting your license, graduating high school, all the stuff that goes on. I ended up going in the military, graduating boot camp, all these things my father missed. And so, he wasn't there. And then, so I got married like a year out of high school, had a daughter a year after that. And my father missed all those things. So I squeezed a lot of things in there. And every event, it's like these layers of bitterness just start stacking up, right? And this disillusionment, and he's not there. And so there's a lot of bitterness and brokenness in our relationship that, he's in prison. And this is kind of where I was at. And I was lost myself. I was just
so
searching.
so when all of this went down, now prior, I'm just picking little pieces out as you're sharing. You basically he wasn't living with the family when a lot of this was going on. He had already left.
Yeah, my father, my mother and my father divorced uh, before I can
Okay.
remember when I was a baby. And so, I mean, we saw him in the summers and here and there. He did move closer to us at one point, about 45 minutes away. And so we saw him, but then he went into prison and went to Missouri. He was in Connecticut, then in Pennsylvania. He was in a bunch of places.
But let's just dig into you for just a second then. What was it doing to you? I mean, if you didn't grow up with a father in the house, how did you figure out that you were missing out on stuff? Was it talking to other people? At what point were you realizing, wait a minute, this just isn't right. I'm missing something here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that takes a while for you to realize that. Maybe you look at other people and their families and whatever normal is. Um, I had I had stepfathers that
Okay.
you know were were helpful as much as they could be, but uh, yeah, I think you don't realize kind of what you're missing um, until later in life, and you're like, yeah, I didn't get that. There's some big things I didn't get from my father, which is important. It's huge.
What then for you, if you've been abandoned by this father, what was it inside you that was directed at him specifically then for not being there? Tell me about the psychology and the emotion of that. What made the focus on him not being there?
I think as a young man, I think, well, any young man is supposed to, you look at those who came before you and you look up into your family tree and you're supposed to see great things. You want to see, this great legacy, some heritage that is going to be passed down to you because you look up to these people for whatever reason. I just think we, like, by nature, I think we do that. And so when that's not there, and and you have this hopeless, well, you just become hopeless, I think, and you're just like, oh, I'm gonna do it on my own. Or you look at what's in your family tree and you're like, I can do better than that, right? And so I think and then pride kind of steps in at that point, um, or can. And so, I think that's what I was looking at. Like there wasn't anything in my family tree that was inspiring me, that provided any hope. And so I'm just going to do it on my own, do it my own way. And which can be, which can be dangerous. So, which kind of brings me to the theme of this, you have this longing for legacy, which kind of came out as a theme when years later, when we would tell this story to those incarcerated, the feedback that we got, it just resonated with a lot of people that they long to pass down something greater to the next generation. And even if they, in being incarcerated, they still had a longing for legacy for their children they cared about, their loved ones. And so my father in prison, just kind of moved the story forward a little bit. My father was in prison, Springfield, Missouri, just a couple weeks into his federal time. Some guys started approaching him about going to like a Bible study, a church service in this prison. My dad was really angry. He was he was like, well, first he said no. Then they kept asking him, and so eventually he went. But he said, if anybody tries to hug me, I'm gonna knock him out. That's what he said, and I can see that in my dad. He would that was him at the time, just angry and bitter and broken and prideful, all these things. But they managed to get him to his Bible study, and just over a period of time, he came to Christ. He met this person named Jesus, and started to transform his life. And he, at that point, said, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, just like in Joshua 24. And then he started being concerned about his children, started praying for his children and his father, who, he was, he didn't know what was going on with his father, if he was alive or dead, like I said. And so he just started praying for us.
Were you guys having any kind of communication at all during this prior to him accepting Christ? Did
Sure.
you go visit him? Did he call? Did you guys have any communication?
Yeah, there were calls and letters. I didn't go early on to visit him. It wasn't until he went to Connecticut that I ended up visiting him. And so yeah, there would be letters, and initially he tried to explain why he did the things he did, and he didn't really tell the truth at that point. Later stuff would come out, but then he started, in his letters, started talking about the Bible and Jesus. And I was like, well, at the time I was like, well, good for him. He's got religion, and that's fine. And
So you weren't a Christian, and the upbringing in the home was no Christian influence?
I mean, we were raised Roman Catholic, so there was some fear of God there. There was some knowledge. I didn't have a really personal relationship with Christ. I certainly wouldn't say that. And so I was just, as soon as my mom didn't force us to go to church anymore as a teenager, I didn't go. And so just kind of went my own way, got into a bunch of things. I was in a couple of heavy metal bands in high school, did all kinds of, stuff. But yeah,
Is that like the headbanging stuff?
Oh yeah, the hair band. Like, but my joke is that God knew I didn't have a future in a hair band. That's my joke.
Yeah, there you go. That works. So you had to wear a wig or something.
No, I had hair back then.
Oh, did you really?
I surely, in high school, yeah. I got in a lot of trouble when I had hair, though.
Did you like color it psychedelic colors and stuff?
No, just the big hair,
Just the
the
big
hair
hair.
band. Yeah. But anyways, that's where I was at. But yeah, we would get letters. We would talk on the phone. And then when he got closer to us, we'd go visit him, and I saw some really sketchy prisons that he was in Pennsylvania. It was wild. I still remember going to some of his visiting rooms or talking on the phone between the glass and stuff like that as a kid. As a young teenager, here's the relationship you have with your father. But he tried to start telling us about what God was doing in his life, and he's reading the Bible, and he's giving us these verses, and he's praying for us. I think that was a big deal that he started praying for his sons and his father because he was concerned about them. And I think the people that I meet and talk to in the prisons, because years later we would go in, we would go in together. They are concerned about their children and that longing for legacy. They want to see them, live better lives, maybe make better decisions than they did, perhaps. So yeah, he started praying for us.
So that made somewhat of an impact on you, I guess, if he started reaching. I mean, here he was trying to reach out to you.
Yeah. Yep.
So at some point it was up to you then. What really, because when you talk about the perspective of all of this, it's perhaps a incarcerated father like your father,
Hmm.
comparison of other incarcerated men or women thinking of their children that they are separated from. So you're basically sharing, you as the child missed out your father there, but now your parent is reaching out to you, and I'm saying
Yep.
parent because that way it covers both. But so you as a child, what did it really take to get you to open up to having this renewed or even just a brand new relationship with a father you never
Yeah.
got to know face to face, other than, you know what I mean, just
Yeah.
hearing the bad stories?
Yeah. Well, it took a reconciliation with my Heavenly Father first before I could then really have a healthy, reconciliation with my earthly father. And so my father gets out of prison, and I'm going through a bunch of stuff myself. God is doing some amazing things kind of separately. At the same time, I was in a place of brokenness
Hmm.
in a relationship that I was in. I won't get into all the details, but I was in a very painful place, and it took, well, my father had gotten out of prison. He was actually living with me in South Carolina, and I'm still lost. I remember a guy saying to me, because my dad had sent me a bunch of stuff in the mail at one point. I was in the military, and he had sent me a care package of a bunch of stuff, tracts and things like that, gospel materials. And I remember this guy asking me the question. He's like, "What do you think of all this stuff?" And I just said, I'm not into it, right? And he says to me, it's not a matter of you getting into it, it's a matter of it getting into you.
Hmm. Yeah, good point. And
Anyway,
I
so
mean that's really something that we should spiritually explain
yeah,
now that we're on that other side of
right.
being a Christian for years. That's what that's what the Holy Spirit's job is. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what the whole purpose of the Holy Spirit is, to do things on the inside that we as humans can't do with other people. And I know I find myself praying that way sometimes.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of this is based on the prayer, and how we just say, Lord, there's my words aren't getting through, so I need yours to.
Well, but he doesn't go where he's not invited.
Okay.
So you got to, and that's where it starts. You got to invite him in. And so
He
I
doesn't
hadn't, I
he
hadn't
doesn't pound the
invited.
door down. He might knock, but he's not
He's,
pounding it down.
oh no, he's gentle, and he is relentlessly pursuing us, for sure. But we have to open that door, and let him
That's
in. So
yeah.
that's what I did. My father had gotten out of prison. He was living with me in South Carolina. We were going to like these. He was taking me to church, these different revivals. The summer of like 1990 or 91. He was taking me to these different church revivals like almost every night. And It was called Here's Hope, Jesus Cares for You. That was the name of this campaign that all these churches were doing. And we'd just go to all kinds of different churches. And It was one night that this guy was preaching, And at the time, I really wasn't concerned about eternal life, like what would happen after I die. I was in so much pain where I was. I needed immediate relief for now, and I really needed some help, and because I was in a dark, just desperate place, and just hurting. And so one night, I just got on my face after one of these revivals, and I said, God, if you can do something with this wretched life that I have, this mess that I made, I will give it all to you. I judge because this is what I've done with it, and this is the best I can do. And I think my father came to that point when he was in prison as well. And at that point, I gave my life to Christ. I said, I just gave up, and I said, tell me what to do. I'm inviting you in. And he came in and just started transforming, my life, and the gospel just impacted me in a way that then kind of spread to other people. And so when you realize the depth and how much God has forgiven you, and when you really understand, what he's done, you run to forgive other people. And that's what I did when I realized, oh my gosh, God has forgiven me all these things. I ran to people. I ran to my father, ran to this other relationship that I was in, and just like, hey, here's what happened. God's forgiven me. I'm going to forgive you. And the word says, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Until we have a revelation of the depth of our depravity and how much God has forgiven us, we're gonna, then we're gonna run to forgive people. Forgiving other people is not going to be an issue when you really understand how much He has forgiven you. And so I can't say it was, easy to forgive my father. We had to work through some things and just kind of talk through that. But God, we reconciled at that point. And, I was an early believer. I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm, but over time, God just really worked in our lives. And yeah, it was a great time. And then after he got out of prison, he went into prison ministry for 30 years. For 3 decades, he went back into prisons and ministered. And then eventually I would go back in with him, or I would go in with him. And we, over time, had developed a presentation, and it was pretty powerful, that the thing that what God was doing through that. But here's, so all kinds of miracles happened when my father was in prison. To him, all kinds of crazy stuff happened when he was in prison. And he got out, crazy things happened after that. And just miraculous string of miracles in our family. And it all started with that single decision that my father made when he was in prison. And he said, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And he started honoring God. And God started restoring our family tree. And like I said, I wanted to cut it down, but God had a better idea. So one of the miracles that happened was, I said my father we didn't know anything about my grandfather. And I got curious, and I actually wrote to the military. And he was in the military. So I was like, I'm going to get his service record just to kind of get some context of who this guy was, right? And you're not supposed to get that unless the person's dead. I wrote to him, and they sent me the service record. So I get this service record from my grandfather, who was in the Navy, and it's like this thick, right? And it's all these disciplinary records of things that he did, right? Like going AWOL, going like, his ship would leave and he was late, and he would the ship wasn't there, and he's like shows up and he's late, right? He missed the ship leaving, whatever, stuff like that. You don't do that. That's bad, right? And so I was in the Navy, so I kind of understood all these things. Just a long string of all kinds of disciplinary stuff, and just more kind of abandonment, that theme, if you will. But so one of the things that so anyway, we thought he was dead, right? So my father, probably, I don't know, a few years after he had gotten out of prison, he goes down. He was in this church in like Vermont, and they had sent him to a ministry conference in Florida. And so he goes to Florida. He's at this ministry conference, and he's in this hotel room the last night he was there. And he goes and he opens up the phone book, and he looks for his name. My dad is a junior, okay, and he opens the phone book to our last name, Emerson, and he sees his name in the phone book, right? Just flopped open the phone book. Here's his name in the phone book, and he says, "I wonder if that's my old man." And so he writes down the number. Okay. Next morning, he's leaving. He's on his way out of town. He stops at a phone booth. This is back when they had phone booths, right? And back when they
That
had
was
phone
way
books.
before my time, BJ. I don't remember that.
So he stops in this phone booth in this little town in Florida, and he calls this number. And I usually can't make it through this story, but the guy answers the phone, and he goes, "Sir, did you have a son born such and such a date?" And the guy says, "Yes, yes, I did." And he's like, "Well, I think you're my father." And so they talk, and it's his dad. He miraculously,
Wow.
gets a hold of his father. And so he said, "Well, I wonder if we could meet. I'm on my way out of town, but I wonder if we could meet." And the guy, he says, "Well, you sure you could come over to my house?" And my dad says, "Well, where do you live? And can you give me directions?" And the guy gives him the road and the street. And my dad looks up, and he sees the street sign, and he's down the street from his
Wow.
father.
Wow.
He's just down the street. He gets in his car, he goes down the street, and the guy's out. My grandfather's out in his yard waving. And they connect. And for probably another 10 years, they got to have a relationship. And I went down there to meet him a few years after that. A couple years after that, went down to meet him on his deathbed. My father led him to Christ. Read some scripture to him, and was there when he died. And so they got to have a relationship. I got to meet him. And so I think in the big scheme of things, as I look back, and not many people have this opportunity to see full circle restoration of 3 generations is wild. To see the arc of the goodness of God in your family over 3 generations, and to see what he's doing with the next generation is really a wild perspective that not a lot of people get to see.
How many kids do you have, BJ?
I have two children, 4 grandchildren.
And you've told me you've set things in front of them as they were getting older. What have you done different to break the cycle?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it's so different. When my son was when my son was the age 14 years old, I was reading to him the book that my father and I wrote together about all this stuff. So all this stuff is in two different books. And I was at the point in my life when my father was in prison. When my son was that age, I'm reading him this book. I'm telling him this story, and it's all very objective. Like, this is what happened. It was miraculous. I don't know how to explain it. I'm not going to over spiritualize it. I'm just going to tell you, here's what happened. And so I get to see that perspective. We got to share going into prison with my father and talking about this was really incredible. He passed away about a year ago, but we had some amazing times together when we got to minister together in prisons until some of this story. So I do have a lot of confidence, and we call it faith. We could use the word confidence in the restoration of families. If someone's got a brokenness in their family and they need to forgive, I'm like,
Hey,
yeah, let's go. Let's talk about it. I'm
BJ,
ready to go. I have faith for that.
I want you to share. There had to be times when just the two of you sat down around a picnic table or chairs out in the backyard and just talked about all of this.
Yeah.
How was that? How was that? How did that dialogue go after after the restoration, and you're sitting there, just the two of you, like, wow, look at our story.
Well, it was really about God's story and what he was doing in our lives. And we were just in awe of what he had done
Mm.
and how he was independently working on both of us and restoring that relationship. And then, so we each had relationships with our Heavenly Father, and that brought us closer together, and we shared, just what he was doing in our lives, and we would talk. No, it was tremendous. It was really awesome. But I think when we had the opportunity, because here's what would happen. I was living here in this part of North Carolina where I live. He was in a different part of North Carolina, about 4 hours away, and he was on this ministry team with his church. And they would go to different prisons in the area, and they would come up in this area, and I would go about once a month, not every month, but I would go and meet them, and we'd go in a couple of different facilities, and they would let us share. And so I would start kind of the conversation, talking about my father and being the child of an incarcerated parent and all the story that he was facing 76 years. And um, I had great confidence talking to these men, and we'd bring them and fill up these in this gym, fill up these bleachers with all these guys. And then I would surprise them and bring up my father, and then let him talk about him and his father in this miraculous, when they were reunited. And then I would stand there and say, look, who's going to stand up with me and stop the cycle in your family? And we would invite them down to stand with us. And all these guys would come forward saying, I want to make a decision today to follow Jesus and to start serving the Lord. And just like Joshua, is for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And these guys would come down and stand with us. So many guys, we'd have to break them up into groups to go pray with them. It was tremendous what we were able to do and what we saw God do through us as we ministered together. That was a really powerful time. We got to do that a bunch of times here,
It's good.
different facilities. But yeah, no, it was an incredible time.
Hey, BJ, I want to dig deep in that brain of yours. So I know you've thought a lot about this, and you're making a really, really big deal. I want you to define legacy. Define it
Sure.
to our listeners. What is it really all about? What does it mean? What does the word legacy mean?
I think one of the definitions that I found that I liked was the impact that we endeavor to create in the lives of others. The impact that we endeavor to create, and what we want to hand down, for the next generation, or how people will remember us. I think that's important to a lot of people. How are we going to be remembered? Which is interesting. One little story I'll share. What I found in that record, that military record of my grandfather, speaking about that, is because in some regards you don't really control your legacy. Certainly, we can't even protect our reputations when we're alive. How we expect to protect them when we're dead, right? People are going to say all kinds of things about us. But I dug into my grandfather's military record, and there was one point where he got in really big trouble, and eventually he got dishonorably discharged, which is not a good thing. That's not a good thing in your legacy, right? But the reason he was discharged because he didn't show up again for the ship going out to sea for a long period of time. And I looked at the dates, and the reason that he didn't show up because he was going to be with his wife at the time, to be with my father when he was born.
Oh, wow.
I looked at the dates and they lined up when my father was born. My grandfather wanted to be there, and he didn't go to where he was supposed to go, but he went to be with his wife when his son was being born. That's why he didn't, that's why he was dishonorably discharged. So my point there is that, I can look at, you don't control your legacy anyway. Um, but you can look back and I can change my grandfather's legacy just with that story. Because that was an honorable thing I think that he did. Should he been where he was supposed to go? Yeah, but he went to be with when his son was born. So, and that's probably meaningful for my father, right? That was probably really meaningful to
Yeah,
him.
I mean, so you dig that up and make the record straight. Thank God you did that. Um, to bring something good out of what seemed to be a stack of negatives.
Yeah,
You hear that saying, born in whatever year dash, died ever whatever year. It's whatever we do during that dash.
yeah, yep.
And I think we can affect our legacy by the choices we make. Clearly,
Well,
clearly your father and you made choices, and that legacy is how you're remembered. Um,
but
but
here's
also it's how you choose to remember somebody.
but here's the thing. Uh, when yes, we have legacies, we have these wills things we want to do. But what happens when we leave our legacies in the hands of a loving God? What happens when we submit that to His story?
So that's really kind of where you're going with all of this then. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for
okay.
sure. And so that's the question I ask. So I'm doing a new series for Victorious Living called The Longing for Legacy. And I remember just another story. We were in this one prison. We had told our story. We're all done. And this guy comes up to us, big, mean looking guy, huge guy, really mean looking, tattoos everywhere. He comes up to us, but he's weeping. And
Yeah.
he says, I wish my daughters would forgive me the way that you forgave your father. Right. And I'm crying with him. Right. And again, here's this longing for legacy, this longing for restoration. But what happens when we take that and submit it to God's will, to God's, take our kingdom and put it under His kingdom? We submit to Him. And so my whole argument is, putting our legacies and submitting them to Him, letting Him take it, leaving it in the hands of a loving God. What happens? And I think that's part of our story, because that's what we did. We're like, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, and we're going to submit everything to Him. And now one of the questions I ask, or one of the things I have in the book here, we talked about, I think, is how do you know if you have a longing for legacy? Right? Here's some signs. How do you know? Number one, you have regrets over broken relationships and desire restoration. You have regrets over broken relationships. Number two, you feel imprisoned by unforgiveness. And I think forgiveness is something that we really need to look more into. But number three, there's a cycle of dysfunction in your family line that you'd like to end. And that's what we were inviting guys to do. Like, hey, it stops here. And that's what my dad said. And he changed the direction. He changed the entire directory with that one decision to follow Christ. It changed everything for our family. That's what I think what we're challenging people to do. Leave your legacy in the hands of a loving God and watch what happens.
Well, gosh, we could talk for a long time. I think that statement right there is a good way to end this discussion, and just let our viewers know there's more to come out there.
Yeah.
There's so appreciate you, BJ. Appreciate all your hard work. Appreciate this story. Hey, think of your grandfather and your dad, the family tree, the lineage.
Yeah.
You had it had a way of kind of the branches got reconnected. They were drooping, whatever.
Yeah, no, it was dead.
That's pretty cool.
The tree was dead, and God restored it. He had a better
Wow.
idea, and He has a better option for our lives, our legacies, And I think we just need to submit to him and see what he does with it. Watch what he does with it, because he has bigger ideas, so much better than anything we could come up with. He's the loving Heavenly Father, and we can trust him with our lives. And so, yeah, great conversation. Really appreciate being with you. And I would just say, watch this series, The Longing for Legacy, learn more, and to see, because there's a how. How do you do this? That's what I get into in this series. How do you do this? So stay tuned.
Thanks, BJ.
All right.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Randy.
All right.
See ya.
Thank you for watching our broadcast. Are you an incarcerated brother or sister who needs encouragement? Write to us at Victorious Living Correspondence, P.O. Box 2751, Greenville, North Carolina, 27836, or email us at hope@vlmag.org. To view Victorious Living magazine in its entirety, please have your chaplain contact us at 352-478-2098 or email us through our website at vlmag.org. We are happy to provide our Victorious Living magazine free of charge in bulk with or without staples.